The morning sun cast dancing reflections across the crystal-clear water of what I believed was my sanctuary, my own backyard swimming pool. Little did I know that this Tuesday in July would transform from a perfect summer day into the most bizarre and emotionally draining experience of my adult life. As I stood there in my favorite navy blue swimsuit, towel draped over my shoulder, I felt that familiar sense of peace that only comes from having your own private oasis. The pool had been my dream for 3 years, saved for penny by penny, planned and replanned until every detail was perfect. I had moved into 42 Maple Street exactly 18 months ago, a charming suburban neighborhood where the houses sat on generous lots with well-defined property lines. The previous owners, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, had been meticulous about maintaining their backyard, and when I purchased the home, the pool was one of the major selling points. It wasn't just any pool, it was a beautiful kidney-shaped design with integrated lighting, a small waterfall feature, and surrounded by carefully manicured landscaping that created a resort-like atmosphere right in my own backyard. The first sign of trouble came at exactly 9:47 a.m. I remember the time precisely because I had just checked my phone to see if my friend Maya had responded to my invitation for an afternoon pool party, instead of the peaceful sounds of suburbia chirping distant lawnmowers. The gentle hum of my pool's filtration system, I heard the sharp staccato of high heels clicking aggressively across concrete. "Excuse me, excuse me." The voice was shrill, demanding, and carried that particular tone that immediately puts your nervous system on high alert. I turned from where I was adjusting the pool skimmer to see a woman I'd never encountered before, marching across my backyard with the confidence of someone who owned the place. She was probably in her mid-50s, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair that didn't move despite her aggressive stride. Wearing what appeared to be an expensive workout ensemble that looked like it had never seen actual exercise. Her makeup was immaculate, even at this early hour, and she carried herself with a sort of rigid posture that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager," before she even opened her mouth. "You need to get out of my pool area immediately," she declared, planting herself firmly on my pool deck, with her hands on her hips. Her voice carried across the water with such authority that for a split second, I actually questioned my own reality. Was I somehow confused about where I lived? Had I sleepwalked into someone else's backyard? "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to stammer, my brain struggling to process this surreal situation. "This is my pool. This is my backyard. I live here." The woman, who I would soon learn was the infamous Karen from 3 houses down, let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Listen, sweetie," she said, using the kind of condescending tone typically reserved for particularly slow children. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this pool belongs to the Homeowners Association. It's community property, and I've been using it for my morning swims for the past 5 years. You can't just come in here and act like you own the place." The absurdity of the statement hit me like a physical blow. I looked around my own backyard, at my patio furniture, my barbecue grill, my garden shed, the privacy fence that clearly delineated my property line, trying to understand how this woman could possibly believe what she was saying. My pool sat squarely in the center of my backyard, at least 30 feet from any property line, surrounded by my landscaping, connected to my house's electrical and plumbing systems. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through my system, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Jennifer Walsh. I bought this house 18 months ago. This pool is on my property. It's connected to my utilities. I have the deed, the property survey, the pool maintenance records, everything that proves this is mine." Karen's face began to flush a deep red that clashed spectacularly with her perfectly applied foundation. "Don't you dare lie to me," she shrieked, her composure cracking like ice on a warm day. "I've been swimming in this pool every Tuesday and Thursday morning for years. The previous owners were my dear friends, and they gave me explicit permission to use this facility. Permission doesn't just disappear because some new person moves in. The logic was so flawed, so completely divorced from reality, that I found myself wondering if I was being pranked. I looked around for hidden cameras, half expecting someone to jump out and tell me this was all an elaborate joke. But fury was genuine, her indignation palpable, and her apparent belief in her own version of reality was both fascinating and terrifying. Even if that were true, I said, trying to remain reasonable despite the growing knot of anger in my stomach. Any permission the previous owners might have given would have ended when they sold the house. You can't just continue using someone else's private property without the new owner's consent. Private property? Karen's voice reached a pitch that I was certain the neighbors 3 blocks away could hear. This is a community amenity. Everyone knows that pools in this neighborhood are for everyone to enjoy. You can't just hoard it for yourself. That's selfish and probably against HOA regulations. I took a deep breath, recognizing that I was dealing with someone who had constructed an entire alternate reality in her mind, and any facts that contradicted that reality would be met with increasing hostility. But I had to try one more time. To be reasonable, Karen, I started. How do you know my name? She interrupted suspiciously, as if my knowledge of her identity was somehow evidence of my wrongdoing. Your voice carries, I said diplomatically, having heard her screaming at various neighbors, delivery drivers, and landscapers over the past year and a half. Look, I understand there might have been some informal arrangement with the previous owners, but that arrangement is over. This is now my private property, and I'm not comfortable with strangers using my pool. The word strangers seemed to trigger something primal in Karen. Her entire body began to tremble with rage, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to a menacing whisper that was somehow more intimidating than her previous shrieking. Strangers, she hissed. I am a pillar of this community. I've lived here longer than you've probably been alive. I am the secretary of the Homeowners Association, the organizer of the annual block party, and the chair of the Neighborhood Watch Committee. You, on the other hand, are nobody. You're just some random person who wandered into OUR neighborhood and thinks they can change OUR rules and take away OUR amenities. The possessive pronouns she kept emphasizing revealed the core of her delusions. She genuinely believed that her longevity in the neighborhood gave her ownership, rights over other people's property. It was a breathtaking display of entitlement that would have been almost admirable in its audacity if it weren't so completely insane. I'm going to ask you one more time to leave my property, I said, my patience finally reaching its limit. If you don't, I'll have to call the police. Karen's laugh was triumphant and chilling. Oh, honey, she said, pulling out her phone with a flourish. You don't need to call them. I'm calling them right now. We'll see what Officer Martinez has to say about your little land grab scheme. As she began dialing, I felt a mixture of emotions washing over me: anger at her audacity, fear about how this might escalate, confusion about how such a bizarre situation had developed, and underneath it all a growing sadness about what this said about human nature and the way some people navigate the world. The pool water continued to sparkle innocently in the morning sun, its peaceful surface occasionally disturbed by a gentle breeze, completely oblivious to the fact that it had somehow become the center of a neighborhood war that would soon involve law enforcement, property records, and revelations that would shake both of our worlds to their very foundations. As Karen spoke animatedly into her phone, painting me as some sort of trespasser and con artist, I realized that this was just the beginning. Whatever happened next would determine not just who had the right to use this pool, but would reveal truths about property, community, and human nature that neither of us was prepared to face. In a small village, a cat named Whiskers discovered a magic fish in a pond. The fish promised 3 wishes in exchange for its freedom. Whiskers wished for endless fish, a cozy bed, and a bell that rang softly. The fish granted all 3 wishes and swam away, leaving Whiskers content and purring in 23 minutes later. I watched through my kitchen window as a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I gathered my property documents deed, survey, insurance papers, and the pool installation records I'd found in the previous owner's file cabinet. Karen stood at the edge of my property line, arms crossed, wearing the smug expression of someone who believed victory was imminent. Officer Martinez turned out to be a patient, middle-aged Hispanic man with kind eyes and the weary demeanor of someone who'd dealt with neighborhood disputes more times than he cared to count. As he approached, Karen immediately launched into her version of events, gesturing dramatically toward the pool while painting me as some sort of squatter who had somehow infiltrated the neighborhood's community amenities. Officer, thank goodness you're here, Karen gushed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This woman has somehow gotten into our community pool area and is refusing to leave. She's claiming it belongs to her, which is absolutely ridiculous. I've been using this pool for years with the Hendersons' permission, and just because they moved doesn't mean some random person can come in and steal our recreational facilities." Officer Martinez listened politely, taking notes, then turned to me. "Ma'am, can you tell me your side of this situation?" I took a deep breath and explained the facts, that I had purchased the house, that the pool was on my private property, and that I had all the documentation to prove it. As I handed him my papers, I watched his expression shift from neutral professionalism to barely concealed amazement. Mrs. Key looked at Karen expectantly. "Whitmore." "Karen Whitmore. And it's Miss Whitmore? Thank you very much." "Miss Whitmore," Officer Martinez said carefully. "I've reviewed these documents, and I'm afraid there's no question here. This pool is located entirely on Miss Walsh's private property. It's not a community amenity. You don't have any legal right to use it without her permission." The color drained from Karen's face, then rushed back with double intensity. "That's impossible!" she sputtered. "Henry Henderson told me specifically that this pool was installed by the developer as a community feature. He said the weird shape and placement was because it had to serve multiple households." Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, property records don't lie. This pool was installed by the Hendersons in 2019, entirely within their property boundaries. Miss Walsh inherited it when she purchased the home." But instead of accepting defeat, Karen's expression suddenly shifted to something I can only describe as cunning. "Wait," she said slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Officer Martinez, did you say 2019? "Yes, ma'am. That's interesting," Karen continued, her voice taking on a strange, almost sing-song quality, "because I have photos on my phone of me swimming in this exact pool in 2018, Christmas Day, 2018 to be specific. How do you explain that?" My blood turned to ice water. Officer Martinez frowned and looked between us. "Ma'am, if you have evidence that contradicts the property records, ... Karen was already scrolling through her phone with triumphant fingers. "Here," she said, thrusting the device toward the officer. "Christmas Day, 2018. There I am, doing my morning laps in this very pool. Notice the distinctive kidney shape, the waterfall feature, the blue tile border. Exact match." Officer Martinez studied the phone screen, his frown deepening. I felt the world tilting around me as he looked up with confusion clear in his eyes. "Miss Walsh, according to your property records, this pool was installed in 2019, but this photograph clearly shows it existed in 2018. "That's impossible," I whispered. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a cold certainty settling in. My stomach. Something was very, very wrong here. Karen's smile was venomous. "What's impossible, dear, is that you think you can gaslight an entire community about our shared resources. I don't know how you managed to falsify those property records, but the truth has a way of coming out. Property records can't be falsified," Officer Martinez said slowly, "but they can be ... incomplete." He looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Miss Walsh, is it possible you weren't told the complete history of this property when you purchased it?" My mind raced back to the closing, to my realtor's assurances, to the home inspection. Everything had seemed straightforward. The Hendersons were downsizing, moving to a retirement community in Florida. The pool was a selling point, maintained and beautiful. But now that I thought about it, there had been some confusion about certain permits, some paperwork that seemed to be missing. "I need to make a phone call," I said weakly. "Oh, you do that, honey," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Call whoever you need to call. But while you're doing that, I'm going to take my morning swim in the pool I've been using for 7 years. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said firmly, "until this situation is resolved, I'm going to have to ask everyone to stay out of the pool area." Karen's face contorted with fury. "You can't be serious. This is harassment. This woman shows up with some fake paperwork, and suddenly I'm banned from facilities I've been using since before she even knew this neighborhood existed." But there was something else in her expression, now something that looked almost like fear, as if she realized that her photograph might have opened a door she didn't want opened. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed my realtor, Diane Morrison. She answered on the second ring, her cheerful voice a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in my backyard. "Jennifer, how lovely to hear from you. How are you enjoying the house?" "Diane," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to ask you about the pool. When exactly was it installed?" There was a pause. "The pool. Well, let me see. According to my records, it was installed by the Hendersons in 2019. Why do you ask? Are you certain about that date?" Another pause, longer this time. "Jennifer, is everything all right? You sound upset. Someone has a photograph of the pool from 2018, Christmas Day, 2018. If it wasn't installed until 2019, ... double quotes, the silence that followed was deafening. When Diane finally spoke, her voice had lost all its cheerful professionalism. "Jennifer, I think you need to come to my office right now and bring any documentation you have about the pool." "What aren't you telling me, Diane? Not over the phone, just ... come in. There are some things about that property that I think we need to discuss." As I hung up, I saw that both Officer Martinez and Karen were staring at me. The officer looked professionally concerned, but Karen's expression was something else entirely. There was triumph there, yes, but also something that looked disturbingly like panic. "Well," Karen demanded, "what did your little realtor friend have to say?" "She wants to see me in her office," I said numbly. "I bet she does," Karen said, with a harsh laugh. "I bet there are a lot of people who are going to want to see you once the truth comes out about how you scammed your way into ownership of community property." But Officer Martinez was studying Karen with new interest. "Miss Whitmore," he said slowly, "if you've been using this pool since 2018, and it's documented in photographs, why didn't you file any kind of legal claim when the property was sold? Why didn't you contact the real estate agents or the new buyer to establish your usage rights?" For the first time since this nightmare began, Karen looked genuinely flustered. I assumed. "Henry told me that any new owners would honor the existing arrangements. But you didn't document those arrangements. You didn't have any written agreement." "It was a gentleman's agreement," Karen snapped. "Some things are done on trust and community spirit. Not everything needs to be written down in legal documents." Officer Martinez nodded slowly, but I could see he wasn't buying it. "Miss Whitmore, I'm going to need you to email me that photograph and any other documentation you might have about your arrangement with the previous owners." "Of course," Karen said quickly. "I'll send it right over." As the officer began wrapping up his initial investigation, informing us both that this was now a civil matter that might require further legal review, I found myself staring at the pool that had been my pride and joy just an hour ago. The water still sparkled innocently in the afternoon sun, but now it seemed to hold secrets, lies, and complications I couldn't begin to understand. What had really happened here? How could property records show a 2019 installation date for a pool that apparently existed in 2018? What wasn't my realtor telling me? And most disturbing of all, what was Karen so afraid of now that her photograph had raised these questions? As Officer Martinez drove away and Karen retreated to her own property with promises to get to the bottom of this fraud, I stood alone beside the pool that might not be legally mine, wondering if my dream home had just become my worst nightmare. The truth, whatever it was, lay somewhere beneath the surface of these still waters, and I had a sinking feeling that when it finally emerged, nothing in my quiet suburban life would ever be the same again.